Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Stephen, Joe, and Michael. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes heard nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. And just one more shout out. Hello, Bethany from Spotify. I really appreciate you listening. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight we return to what has to be one of the most popular books on this podcast. The Book of Household Management, comprising information for the mistress, housekeeper, cook, kitchen maid, butler, footman, coachman, valet, upper and under housemaids, lady's maid, maid of all work, laundry maid, nurse and nursemaid, monthly wet and sick nurses, etc., etc. Also sanitary, medical, and legal memoranda, with a history of the origin, properties, and uses of all things connected with home life and comfort, by Mrs. Isabella Beeton. Published originally by S.O. Beeton in 24 monthly parts, 1859 to 1861, and first published in a bound edition in 1861. Let's pick up right where we left off, in the middle of the chapter on soups, with recipes and a history of the main ingredients therein. Let's begin. Onion soup. Ingredients: 6 large onions, 2 ounces of butter, salt and pepper to taste, 1/4 pint of cream, 1 quart of stock. Mode: chop the onions, put them in the butter, stir them occasionally, but do not let them brown. When tender, put the stock to them and season. Strain the soup and add the boiling cream. Time: 1 1/2 hour. Average cost: 1 shilling per quart. Seasonable in winter. Sufficient for 4 persons. Cheap onion soup. Ingredients: 8 middling-sized onions, 3 ounces of butter, a tablespoonful of rice flour, salt and pepper to taste, 1 teaspoonful of powdered sugar, thickening of butter and flour, 2 quarts of water. Mode: cut the onions small, put them in the stew pan with the butter and fry them well. Mix the rice flour smoothly with the water. Add the onions, seasoning, and sugar and simmer till tender. Thicken with butter and flour and serve. Time 2 hours. Average cost 4 pence per quart. Seasonable in winter. Sufficient for 8 persons. The onion. Like the cabbage, this plant was erected into an object of worship by the idolatrous Egyptians 2,000 years before the Christian era, and it still forms a favorite food in the country of these people, as well as in other parts of Africa. When it was first introduced to England has not been ascertained, but it has long been in use and esteemed as a favorite seasoning plant of various dishes. In warmer climates it is much milder in its flavor, and such as are grown in Spain and Portugal are, comparatively speaking, very large, and are often eaten both in a boiled and roasted state. The Strasbourg is the most esteemed, and although all the species have highly nutritive properties, they impart such a disagreeable odor to the breath that they are often rejected even where they are liked. Chewing a little raw parsley is said to remove this odor. Pan kale. Ingredients: 2 pounds of cabbage or Savoy greens, 1/4 pound of butter or dripping, salt and pepper to taste, oatmeal for thickening, 2 quarts of water. Mode: chop the cabbage very fine, thicken the water with oatmeal, put in the cabbage and butter or dripping, season and simmer for 1 1/2 hour. It can be made sooner by blanching and mashing the greens, adding any good liquor that a joint has been boiled in, and then further thicken with bread or pounded biscuit. Time 1 1/2 hour. Average cost 1 1/2 pence per quart. Seasonable all the year but more suitable in winter. Sufficient for 8 persons. The Savoy. This is a close-hearted, wrinkle-leaved cabbage, sweet and tender, especially the middle leaves, and in season from November to spring. The yellow species bears hard weather without injury, whilst the dwarf kind are improved and rendered more tender by frost. Parsnip soup. Ingredients: 1 pound of sliced parsnips, 2 ounces of butter, salt and cayenne to taste, 1 quart of stock. Mode: put the parsnips into the stew pan with the butter, which has been previously melted, and simmer them till quite tender. Then add nearly a pint of stock, and boil together for half an hour. Pass all through a fine strainer, and put to it the remainder of the stock. Season, boil, and serve immediately. Time 2 hours. Average cost 6 pence per quart. Seasonable from October to April. Sufficient for 4 persons. The parsnip. This is a biennial plant with a root like a carrot, which in nutritive and saccharine matter it nearly equals. It is a native of Britain, and in its wild state may be found in many parts, growing by the roadside. It is also to be found generally distributed over Europe, and in Catholic countries is mostly used with salt fish in Lent. In Scotland it forms an excellent dish when beat up with butter and potatoes. It is also excellent when fried. In Ireland it is found to yield, in conjunction with the hop, a pleasant beverage, and it contains as much spirit as the carrot, and makes an excellent wine. Its proportion of nutritive matter is 99 parts in 1,000, 9 being mucilage and 90 sugar. Pea soup, green. Ingredients: 3 pints of green peas, 1/4 pound of butter, 2 or 3 thin slices of ham, 6 onions sliced, 4 shredded lettuces, the crumb of 2 French rolls, 2 handfuls of spinach, 1 lump of sugar, 2 quarts of common stock. Mode: put the butter, ham, 1 quart of the peas, onions, and lettuces to a pint of stock and simmer for an hour. Then add the remainder of the stock with the crumb of the French rolls and boil for another hour. Now boil the spinach and squeeze it very dry. Rub the soup through a sieve and the spinach with it to color it. Have ready a pint of young peas boiled. Add them to the soup. Put in the sugar. Give 1 boil and serve. If necessary, add salt. Time 2 1/2 hours. Average cost 1 shilling 9 pence per quart. Seasonable from June to the end of August. Sufficient for 10 persons. Note: it will be well to add, if the peas are not quite young, a little sugar. Where economy is essential, water may be used instead of stock for this soup, boiling in it likewise the pea shells, but use a double quantity of the vegetables. Winter pea soup, yellow. Ingredients: 1 quart of split peas, 2 pounds of shin of beef, trimmings of meat or poultry, a slice of bacon, 2 large carrots, 2 turnips, 5 large onions, 1 head of celery, seasoning to taste, 2 quarts of soft water, any bones left from roast meat, 2 quarts of common stock or liquor in which a joint of meat has been boiled. Mode: put the peas to soak overnight in soft water and float off such as rise to the top. Boil them in the water till tender enough to pulp. Then add the ingredients mentioned above and simmer for 2 hours, stirring it occasionally. Pass the whole through a sieve, skim well, season, and serve with toasted bread cut in dice. Time 4 hours. Average cost 6 pence per quart. Seasonable all the year round, but more suitable for cold weather. Sufficient for 12 persons. The pea. It is supposed that the common gray pea found wild in Greece and other parts of the Levant is the original of the common garden pea, and of all the domestic varieties belonging to it. The gray or field pea, called pissenlit by the French, is less subject to run into varieties than the garden kinds, and is considered by some, perhaps on that account, to be the wild plant, retaining still a large proportion of its original habit. From the tendency of all other varieties to run away and become different to what they originally were, it is very difficult to determine the races to which they belong. The pea was well known to the Romans, and probably was introduced to Britain at an early period, for we find peas mentioned by Lydgate, a poet of the 15th century, as being hawked in London. They seem, however, for a considerable time to have fallen out of use, for in the reign of Queen Elizabeth, Fuller tells us that they were brought from Holland and were accounted fit dainties for ladies. They came so far and cost so dear. There are some varieties of peas which have no lining in their pods, which are eaten cooked in the same way as kidney beans. They are called sugar peas, and the best variety is the large crooked sugar, which is also very good, used in the common way as a culinary vegetable. There is also a white sort, which readily splits when subjected to the action of millstones set wide apart, so as not to grind them. These are used largely for soups and especially for sea stores. From the quantity of farinaceous and saccharine matter contained in the pea, it is highly nutritious as an article of food. Pea soup, inexpensive. Ingredients: 1/4 pound of onions, 1/4 pound of carrots, 2 ounces of celery, 3/4 pound of split peas, a little mint shred fine, 1 tablespoonful of coarse brown sugar, salt and pepper to taste, 4 quarts of water or liquor in which a joint of meat has been boiled. Mode: fry the vegetables for 10 minutes in a little butter or dripping, previously cutting them up in small pieces. Pour the water on them, and when boiling add the peas. Let them simmer for nearly 3 hours or until the peas are thoroughly done. Add the sugar, seasoning, and mint. Boil for 1/4 of an hour and serve. Time: 3 1/2 hours. Average cost: 1 1/2 pence per quart. Seasonable in winter. Sufficient for 12 persons. Potato soup 1. Ingredients: 4 pounds of mealy potatoes, boiled or steamed very dry, pepper and salt to taste, 2 quarts of stock. Mode: when the potatoes are boiled, mash them smoothly, that no lumps remain, and gradually put them to the boiling stock. Pass it through a sieve, season, and simmer for 5 minutes. Skim well and serve with fried bread. Time: 1/2 hour. Average cost: 10 pence per quart. Seasonable from September to March. Sufficient for 8 persons. Potato soup 2. Ingredients: 1 pound of shin of beef, 1 pound of potatoes, 1 onion, 1/2 a pint of peas, 2 ounces of rice, 2 heads of celery, pepper and salt to taste, 3 quarts of water. Mode: cut the beef into thin slices, chop the potatoes and onion, and put them in a stew pan with the water, peas, and rice. Stew gently till the gravy is drawn from the meat. Strain it off, take out the beef, and pulp the other ingredients through a coarse sieve. Put the pulp back in the soup. Cut up the celery in it and simmer this till tender. Season and serve with fried bread cut into it. Time: 3 hours. Average cost: 4 pence per quart. Seasonable from September to March. Sufficient for 12 persons. Potato soup 3. Very economical. Ingredients: 4 middle-sized potatoes well pared, a thick slice of bread, 6 leeks peeled and cut into thin slices as far as the white extends upwards from the roots, a teacupful of rice, a teaspoonful of salt, and half that of pepper, and 2 quarts of water. Mode: the water must be completely boiling before anything is put into it. Then add the whole of the ingredients at once, with the exception of the rice, the salt, and the pepper. Cover and let these come to a brisk boil. Put in the others and let the whole boil slowly for an hour, or till all the ingredients are thoroughly done and their several juices extracted and mixed. Time 2 1/2 hours. Average cost 3d. per quart. Seasonable in winter. Sufficient for 8 persons. The potato. Humboldt doubted whether this root was a native of South America, but it has been found growing wild both in Chile and Buenos Aires. It was first brought to Spain from the neighborhood of Quito in the early part of the 16th century, first to England from Virginia in 1586, and first planted by Sir Walter Raleigh on his estate of Youghal near Cork in Ireland. Thence it was brought and planted in Lancashire in England, and was at first recommended to be eaten as a delicate dish and not as common food. This was in 1587. Nutritious properties. Of 1,000 parts of the potato, Sir H. Davy found about 1/4 nutritive, say 200 mucilage or starch, 20 sugar, and 30 gluten. Prince of Wales's soup. Ingredients: 12 turnips, 1 lump of sugar, 2 spoonfuls of strong veal stock, salt and white pepper to taste, 2 quarts of very bright stock. Mode: peel the turnips and with a cutter cut them in balls as round as possible, but very small. Put them in the stock, which must be very bright, and simmer till tender. Add the veal stock and seasoning. Have little pieces of bread cut round, about the size of a shilling. Moisten them with stock. Put them into a tureen and pour the soup over without shaking, for fear of crumbling the bread, which would spoil the appearance of the soup and make it look thick. Time 2 hours. Seasonable in the winter. Sufficient for 8 persons. The Prince of Wales. This soup was invented by a philanthropic friend of the editress, to be distributed among the poor of a considerable village when the Prince of Wales attained his majority on the 9th of November, 1859. Accompanying this fact, the following notice, which appears in Beeton's Dictionary of Universal Information, may appropriately be introduced, premising that British princes attain their majority in their 18th year, whilst mortals of ordinary rank do not arrive at that period till their 21st. Quote, Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, and heir to the British throne, merits a place in this work on account of the high responsibilities which he is in all probability destined to fulfill as sovereign of the British Empire. On the 10th of November, 1858, he was gazetted as having been invested with the rank of a colonel in the army. Speaking of this circumstance, the Times said, "The significance of this event is that it marks the period when the heir to the British throne is about to take rank among men and to enter formally upon a career which every loyal subject of the Queen will pray may be a long and a happy one. For his own sake, and for the sake of the vast empire, which in the course of nature he will one day be called to govern, the best wish that we can offer for the young prince is that in his own path he may ever keep before him the bright example of his royal mother and show himself worthy of her name. There are few in these realms who will not give a fervent response to these sentiments. Mrs. Beeton, November 9th, 1841. End quote. Potage printanier, or spring soup. Ingredients: 1/2 a pint of green peas if in season, a little chervil, 2 shredded lettuces, 2 onions, a very small bunch of parsley, 2 ounces of butter, the yolks of 3 eggs, 1 pint of water, seasoning to taste, 2 quarts of stock. Mode: put in a very clean stew pan the chervil, lettuces, onions, parsley, and butter to 1 pint of water, and let them simmer till tender. Season with salt and pepper. When done, strain off the vegetables and put 2/3 of the liquor they were boiled in to the stock. Beat up the yolks of the eggs with the other third. Give it a toss over the fire, and at the moment of serving, add this with the vegetables which you strained off to the soup. Time, 3/4 of an hour. Average cost, 1 shilling per quart. Seasonable from May to October. Sufficient for 8 persons. Rice Soup 1. Ingredients: 4 ounces of Patna rice, salt, cayenne, and mace, 2 quarts of white stock. Mode: throw the rice into boiling water and let it remain 5 minutes. Then pour it into a sieve and allow it to drain well. Now add it to the stock boiling and allow it to stew until it is quite tender. Season to taste. Serve quickly. Time, 1 hour. Average cost, 1 shilling 3 pence per quart. Seasonable all the year. Sufficient for 8 persons. Rice. This is a plant of Indian origin and has formed the principal food of the Indian and Chinese people from the most remote antiquity. Both Pliny and Dioscorides class it with the cereals, though Galen places it among the vegetables. Be this as it may, however, it was imported to Greece from India about 286 years before Christ, and by the ancients it was esteemed both nutritious and fattening. There are 3 kinds of rice: the hill rice, the Patna, and the Carolina of the United States. Of these, only the 2 latter are imported to this country, and the Carolina is considered the best, as it is the dearest. The nourishing properties of rice are greatly inferior to those of wheat, but it is both a light and wholesome food. In combination with other foods, its nutritive qualities are greatly increased, but from its having little stimulating power, it is apt, when taken in large quantities alone, to lie long on the stomach. Rice Soup 2. Ingredients: 6 ounces of rice, the yolks of 4 eggs, 1/2 a pint of cream, rather more than 2 quarts of stock. Mode: boil the rice in the stock and rub half of it through a tammy. Put the stock in the stew pan, add all the rice, and simmer gently for 5 minutes. Beat the yolks of the eggs, mix them with the cream previously boiled, and strain through a hair sieve. Take the soup off the fire. Add the eggs and cream, stirring frequently. Heat it gradually, stirring all the time, but do not let it boil, or the eggs will curdle. Time 2 hours. Average cost 1 shilling 4 pence per quart. Seasonable all the year. Sufficient for 8 persons. Sago soup. Ingredients: 5 ounces of sago, 2 quarts of stock. Mode: wash the sago in boiling water and add it by degrees to the boiling stock and simmer till the sago is entirely dissolved and forms a sort of jelly. Time nearly an hour. Average cost 10 pence per quart. Sufficient for 8 persons. Seasonable all the year. Note: the yolks of 2 eggs beaten up with a little cream previously boiled and added at the moment of serving much improves this soup. Sago. The farinaceous food of this name constitutes the pith of the sago tree, the Sagus farinifera of Linnaeus, which grows spontaneously in the East Indies and in the archipelago of the Indian Ocean. There it forms the principal farinaceous diet of the inhabitants. In order to procure it, the tree is felled and sawn in pieces. The pith is then taken out and put in receptacles of cold water, where it is stirred until the flour separates from the filaments and sinks to the bottom, where it is suffered to remain until the water is poured off, when it is taken out and spread on wicker frames to dry. To give it the round granular form in which we find it come to this country, it is passed through a colander, then rubbed into little balls and dried. The tree is not fit for felling until it has attained a growth of 7 years, when a single trunk will yield 600 pounds weight, and as an acre of ground will grow 430 of these trees, a large return of flour is the result. The best quality has a slightly reddish hue and easily dissolves to a jelly in hot water. As a restorative diet, it is much used. Semolina soup. Ingredients: 5 ounces of semolina, 2 quarts of boiling stock. Mode: drop the semolina into the boiling stock and keep stirring to prevent its burning. Simmer gently for half an hour and serve. Time 1/2 an hour. Average cost 10 pence per quart. Seasonable all the year. Sufficient for 8 persons. Semolina. This is the heart of the grano duro wheat of Italy, which is imported for the purpose of making the best vermicelli. It has a coarse appearance and may be purchased at the Italian warehouses. It is also called suji, and semoletta is another name for the finer sort. Soup alla solferino, a Sardinian recipe. Ingredients: 4 eggs, 1/2 pint of cream, 2 ounces of fresh butter, salt and pepper to taste, a little flour to thicken, 2 quarts of bouillon. Mode: beat the eggs, put them into a stew pan and add the cream, butter, and seasoning. Stir in as much flour as will bring it to the consistency of dough. Make it into balls, either round or egg-shaped, and fry them in butter. Put them in the tureen and pour the boiling bouillon over them. Time: 1 hour. Average cost: 1 shilling 3 pence per quart. Seasonable all the year. Sufficient for 8 persons. Note: this recipe was communicated to the editress by an English gentleman who was present at the Battle of Solferino on June 24, 1859, and who was requested by some of Victor Emmanuel's troops on the day before the battle to partake of a portion of their pottage. He willingly enough consented, and found that these clever campaigners had made a most palatable dish from very easily procured materials. In sending the recipe for insertion in this work, he has, however, anglicized and somewhat, he thinks, improved it. Spinach soup, a French recipe. Ingredients: as much spinach as, when boiled, will fill half a vegetable dish. 2 quarts of very clear, medium stock. Mode: make the cooked spinach into balls the size of an egg and slip them into the soup tureen. This is a very elegant soup, the green of the spinach forming a pretty contrast to the brown gravy. Time: 1 hour. Average cost: 1 shilling per quart. Seasonable from October to June. Spinach. This plant was unknown by the ancients, although it was cultivated in the monastic gardens of the continent in the middle of the 14th century. Some say that it was originally brought from Spain, but there is a wild species growing in England and cultivated in Lincolnshire, in preference to the other. There are 3 varieties in use: the round-leaved, the triangular-leaved, and Flanders spinach, known by its large leaves. They all form a useful ingredient in soup, but the leaves are sometimes boiled alone, mashed, and eaten as greens. Tapioca soup. Ingredients: 5 ounces of tapioca, 2 quarts of stock. Mode: put the tapioca into cold stock and bring it gradually to a boil. Simmer gently till tender and serve. Time: rather more than 1 hour. Average cost: 1 shilling or 6 pence per quart. Seasonable all the year. Sufficient for 8 persons. Tapioca. This excellent farinaceous food is the produce of the pith of the cassava tree, and is made in the East Indies and also in Brazil. It is, by washing, procured as a starch from the tree, then dried either in the sun or on plates of hot iron, and afterwards broken into grains, in which form it is imported into this country. Its nutritive properties are large, and as a food for persons of delicate digestion or for children, it is in great estimation. No amylaceous substance, says Dr. Christison, is so much relished by infants about the time of weaning, and in them it is less apt to become sour during digestion than any other farinaceous food, even arrowroot not excepted. Turnip soup. Ingredients: 3 ounces of butter, 9 good-sized turnips, 4 onions, 2 quarts of stock, seasoning to taste. Mode: melt the butter in the stew pan, but do not let it boil. Wash, drain, and slice the turnips and onions very thin. Put them in the butter with a teacupful of stock and stew very gently for an hour. Then add the remainder of the stock and simmer another hour. Rub it through a tammy. Put it back into the stew pan, but do not let it boil. Serve very hot. Time 2½ hours. Average cost 8 pence per quart. Seasonable from October to March. Sufficient for 8 persons. Note: by adding a little cream, this soup will be much improved. The turnip. Although turnips grow wild in England, they are not the original of the cultivated vegetable made use of in this country. In ancient times they were grown for cattle by the Romans, and in Germany and the Low Countries they have from time immemorial been raised for the same purpose. In their cultivated state, they are generally supposed to have been introduced to England from Hanover in the time of George I, but this has been doubted, as George II caused a description of the Norfolk system to be sent to his Hanoverian subjects for their enlightenment in the art of turnip culture. As a culinary vegetable, it is excellent, whether eaten alone, mashed, or mixed with soups and stews. Its nutritious matter, however, is small, being only 42 parts in 1,000. Vegetable marrow soup. Ingredients: 4 young vegetable marrows, or more if very small, 1/2 pint of cream, salt and white pepper to taste, 2 quarts of white stock. Mode: pare and slice the marrows and put them in the stock boiling. When done almost to a mash, press them through a sieve, and at the moment of serving, add the boiling cream and seasoning. Time 1 hour. Average cost 1 shilling 2 pence per quart. Seasonable in summer. Sufficient for 8 persons. The vegetable marrow. This is a variety of the gourd family, brought from Persia by an East India ship, and only recently introduced to Britain. It is already cultivated to a considerable extent, and by many is highly esteemed when fried with butter. It is, however, dressed in different ways, either by stewing or boiling, and besides made into pies. Vegetable soup 1. Ingredients: 7 ounces of carrot, 10 ounces of parsnip, 10 ounces of potato cut into thin slices, 1 1/4 ounce of butter, 5 teaspoonfuls of flour, a teaspoonful of made mustard, salt and pepper to taste, the yolks of 2 eggs, rather more than 2 quarts of water. Mode: boil the vegetables in the water 2 1/2 hours. Stir them often, and if the water boils away too quickly, add more, as there should be 2 quarts of soup when done. Mix up in a basin the butter and flour, mustard, salt, and pepper with a teacupful of cold water. Stir in the soup and boil 10 minutes. Have ready the yolks of the eggs in the tureen. Pour on, stir well, and serve. Time 3 hours. Average cost 4 pence per quart. Seasonable in winter, sufficient for 8 persons. Vegetable soup 2. Ingredients: equal quantities of onions, carrots, turnips, 1/4 pound of butter, a crust of toasted bread, 1 head of celery, a bundle of herbs, salt and pepper to taste, 1 teaspoonful of powdered sugar, 2 quarts of common stock or boiling water. Allow 3/4 pound of vegetables to 2 quarts of water. Mode: cut up the onions, carrots, and turnips. Wash and drain them well and put them in a stew pan with the butter and powdered sugar. Toss the whole over a sharp fire for 10 minutes, but do not let them brown, or you will spoil the flavor of the soup. When done, pour the stock or boiling water on them. Add the bread, celery, herbs, and seasonings. Stew for 3 hours. Skim well and strain it off. When ready to serve, add a little sliced carrot, celery, and turnip, and flavor with a spoonful of Harvey's sauce or a little ketchup. Time 3½ hours. Average cost 6 pence per quart. Seasonable all the year. Sufficient for 8 persons. Vermicelli soup. Ingredients: 1½ pounds of bacon, stuck with cloves, 1/2 ounce of butter, worked up in flour, 1 small fowl trussed for boiling, 2 ounces of vermicelli, 2 quarts of white stock. Mode: put the stock, bacon, butter, and fowl into the stew pan and stew for 3/4 of an hour. Take the vermicelli, add it to a little of the stock, and set it on the fire till it is quite tender. When the soup is ready, take out the fowl and bacon and put the bacon on a dish. Skim the soup as clean as possible. Pour it with the vermicelli over the fowl. Cut some bread thin, put in the soup, and serve. Time 2 hours. Average cost, exclusive of fowl and bacon, 10 pence per quart. Seasonable in winter. Sufficient for 4 persons. Vermicelli. This is a preparation of Italian origin and is made in the same way as macaroni, only the yolks of eggs, sugar, saffron, and cheese are added to the paste. Useful soup for benevolent purposes. Ingredients: an ox cheek, any pieces of trimmings of beef, which may be bought very cheaply, say 4 pounds, a few bones, any pot liquor the larder may furnish, 1/4 peck of onions, 6 leeks, a large bunch of herbs, 1/2 pound of celery. The outside pieces or green tops do very well. 1/2 pound of carrots, 1/2 pound of turnips, 1/2 pound of coarse brown sugar, 1/2 a pint of beer, 4 pounds of common rice or pearl barley, 1/2 pound of salt, 1 ounce of black pepper, a few raspings, 10 gallons of water. Mode: cut up the meat in small pieces, break the bones, put them in a copper with the 10 gallons of water, and stew for 1/2 an hour. Cut up the vegetables, put them in with the sugar and beer, and boil for 4 hours. 2 hours before the soup is wanted, add the rice and raspings, and keep stirring till it is well mixed in the soup, which simmer gently. If the liquor reduces too much, fill up with water. Time 6½ hours. Average cost 1½ pence per quart. The above recipe was used in the winter of 1858 by the editress, who made each week in her copper 8 or 9 gallons of this soup for distribution amongst about a dozen families of the village near which she lives. The cost, as will be seen, was not great, but she has reason to believe that the soup was very much liked and gave to the members of those families a dish of warm, comforting food in place of the cold meat and piece of bread which form with too many cottagers their usual meal, when with a little more knowledge of the cooking art they might have, for less expense, a warm dish every day. And with that generous but slightly judgy thought from Mrs. B, I think we'll end this evening's reading from the Book of Household Management. We've only just gotten through the vegetable soups, so there are many, many more pages of soups being boiled to death in your future. I hope you enjoyed that. If you'd like to read this classic for yourself, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.